Welcome to a Geeks Guide to Agile Facilitation Methods. This is basically a bit of a personal journey that I've been on to try and understand more about facilitation. It's something that I've been directly or indirectly involved in the Agile community for many years and thought that I really knew a lot about facilitation. But as soon as I started writing about it, I realized that actually there was a great deal about facilitation methods that I really didn't know. And so this is my attempt to kind of capture some of those things and share them with you. And so I'm hoping that along the way, you'll discover a few things like I did. And you guys may be experts in kinds of facilitation I've never heard of. So please don't hesitate to chime in with your own insights or ideas along the way. This is very much a work in progress. So with that said, just a quick introduction. I am Tom Perry, Agile Transformation Consultant and Coach. I am the author of the Little Book of Impediments. I like to do a lot of writing, and so I wrote a little book on the miracle of impediments. And I'm also the founder of the Agile Management Northwest Conference, which goes on once each year in the fall. Although this year, it's going to very likely be a virtual conference. And so we're trying to figure out what that's going to look like. I live up here in Seattle with my wife and two charming daughters and one little dog, and enjoy sailing and generally causing trouble in the Northwest. A few qualifying notes that I thought would be worth sharing with folks. The first is that this is intended to be a survey of facilitation methods. And it's the methods that I'm aware of or that I've been able to find. So it's very likely not comprehensive or authoritative in any sense. So like I said, if you see stuff I missed, I'd love to hear about it. It's also intended to cover methods, not individual tools or practices, at least as much as I could discern. So one of the things that you're probably familiar with is that there are literally hundreds of different tools and practices like icebreakers and other kinds of techniques that people collect, and you can get books full of them. I've got a couple on my shelf, books that are exclusively just catalogs of icebreakers. Thiagi is well known for literally thousands of different icebreakers and techniques. I'm not trying to do that. That's just way too much. So what I'm trying to do is talk about the methods here and not the individual tools and practices because it's just way too huge. I also want to confess that I'm not an expert at all or even most of these methods. So what I'm going to try and do is indicate where I've had direct experience, and I'll also let you know about stuff that I haven't done before. I do have some opinions about some of these things, and I'll probably share a few along the way. Of course, your mileage may vary, so you don't have to agree with me. And any grouping or categorization that I've done is purely my own. And so it's based on my own insights, and I could be wrong, but I'm probably not. So with that in mind, let's move on. Quick note here, this is what I mean by facilitation. Facilitation is often used to describe a good meeting, what it takes to run an effective meeting. I'm talking about something a little bit different, or I'm thinking about something a little bit different when I talk about facilitation. So what I'm talking about when I talk about facilitation is something that helps a group to really unlock new ideas and new ways of thinking. So I'm thinking of something that's kind of transformative in its nature. And so whatever tools and practices that a method brings to bear should have some sort of transformative effect on the group. And so I'm going way beyond just effective meetings here when I talk about these methods. I'm looking for things that really open up and transform the conversation. And so this is not just your standard effective meeting practices here that I want to talk about. That leads us to my map of the systems and methods for facilitation here. And this represents all of the facilitation methods that I could find. In aggregate, I believe there are 28 of them at this point. And so I've categorized them according to their similarities. So as you'll see along the left-hand side here, there are games or play-based facilitation techniques, positive facilitation techniques, open facilitation methods, design-based facilitation, participatory facilitation, therapeutic facilitation, and visual facilitation. I'm going to confess right now, I had no idea there were this many kinds of facilitation methods out there. And just between you and me, this is probably the tip of the iceberg. All right, so there's probably a whole lot more than this that I've missed. But this seemed like a pretty good start. And so I'll start with some of these, and this is intended again just to be a survey, so I can't go through all of them in detail. But when you look at this, there's an awful lot of ground to cover. So let's look at games and construct facilitation. It's based on this notion. It's founded on play. This whole branch of facilitation is really founded on the idea that we should be having fun, and by doing so, that's going to unlock our creativity and unlock the ideation that goes along with that. So play breaks us out of our mold of standard meetings, and it can remove more serious attitudes like shame or embarrassment that impede brainstorming. So based on that foundation, we can look at some of the early, this was my first introduction to games and to play, which was Luke Holman's book on innovation games. And it's basically a toolkit of different techniques for eliciting product innovation, product ideas. So this was all around games to help groups of customers and stakeholders come up with ideas for products. And there are probably a lot of games that you're familiar with in here, many of which are not unique. These are things like the sailboat exercise or the cereal box game that we use to help elicit different ideas for product development. Another similar catalog or inventory of practices was game storming. And game storming was a very comprehensive list of practices and tools for, again, creative play. The thing that I thought was unique about game storming was that it brought this idea of game boarding, of collecting all of these, or rather assembling a collection of tools to help you achieve a certain goal. So not just being a catalog, what you do is you use certain practices for collecting data. You use a different set of practices and tools for interpreting the data. You use a different set of practices and tools for coming to conclusions and reaching some sort of objective. And so it becomes an assembly process where you have a catalog of different techniques and you assemble them based on the kind of outcome or goal that you're trying to achieve. Liberating Structures is a very popular set of techniques. There are 35 in total. And with Liberating Structures, again, you have this catalog of well-established techniques, many of which are not unique. Some of them, like Triz and others, have been around independently for a long time. They've just been incorporated into this catalog. And then with liberating structures, what you do is assemble those practices into strings. And the strings are just like with game storming. You might assemble them with exercises that help you gather data and then interpret the data and things like that. So liberating structures is very, very popular right now. And then there's Lego Serious Play. And this came about in the mid 90s as an effort that was academic in origins, where what they did was they were holding strategy meetings with Lego, the company, and they introduced the toys into the meetings to help people unwind and start to have conversations and describe the different initiatives they were trying to undertake, the different strategies they were trying to undertake in a physical form. And so they discovered that getting this more playful attitude into the boardroom led to much better strategy meetings, and people were able to get a lot more accomplished by incorporating the use of Legos. And you can go out and you can buy these kits, these Lego Serious Play kits, and there's a whole methodology associated with using them to support strategic conversations. Now, as you're probably familiar, Lego has been used in all sorts of stuff. I've seen it used in to facilitate conversations about Kinefin, and you've probably seen it used for a lot of other sorts of collaborative exercises. Oops, got somebody waiting in there. There's one other that I was aware of, which is Playmobil. So they've started offering a kit, and it looks like they're basically copying what the Lego folks did, which is, again, using the Playmobil toys for people to model their organization. And again, it's a kit you can buy online with the facilitation tools to go with. So these are some of the play-based game facilitation style methods that are out there. Are there others that folks are aware of? Well, then we'll assume it's a pretty good list for the moment. There are a couple of conferences you might want to be aware of that focus on these facilitation methods. There's Play for Agile and Agile Games, both of which have been very popular in recent years. They started 2 or 3 years ago. So popping back out again, that is the games and play-based facilitation techniques. When it comes to positive facilitation, let's take a look at those things. This is all around the words. So the words we use influence the message and how the message is perceived. And so use the right words and the message can be very positive. Use the wrong words, the message can be very negative and have an impact on what we're trying to achieve. And we often use violent and negative metaphors to describe the problems we're faced with, the things that we are battling, so to speak. And changing our language can transform how we see our challenges. That's the premise underlying these methods. So the first one is appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is based on focusing on what's going well and what we can amplify. So we're looking for the strengths in the organization and the things that they do well, rather than talking about the things that they're not doing well, the things that they're inadequate at. This is focusing only on the stuff that is positive, which is almost a complete reversal of how most conversations within organizations go. And so we look for those positive things and look for ways to enhance those because that's where our strengths are. I've used this. I like it personally. I think it's going to be the kind of thing that is increasingly common, but I found that it's challenging to use in some cultures. So there are some cultures where this feels very artificial, and unless they really are on board with this approach, it can fall flat very quickly. So I found that it can be very challenging to facilitate using appreciative inquiry in the wrong culture. Another one is nonviolent communication. This is one that I haven't had much experience with. This one is very, very focused on the language that you use and using the right words and the wrong words and sharing awkward things like feelings and needs and things like that. And so I can't speak to a lot of experience with this, and that's probably because I've dropped the F-bomb one too many times. It's a model that is fairly popular in the Agile community, and so worth mentioning here. Another is is called Neurolinguistic Programming, and it's based on a psychological approach, and it is based on cognitive research. And the idea is that by changing the language we use, we can change thoughts and the patterns of behavior associated with them. And so we that kind of focus is what the emphasis for NLP is about. I don't have experience with NLP. I have a background in psychology, so I understand some of these terms, but it's nothing that I've actually tried to facilitate with. So those are sort of the positive focus methods. The next is what I call open facilitation. And open facilitation encompasses a lot of the methods that are used to open up the process and remove rules and constraints. Think open space and open space technology, where we have basically taken away all of the rules for what a conference is like and instead said, we're going to open it up to everybody. So open space, many of you have probably participated in open space and open space events. Very popular, where the people who show up are the ones who create the program. And it's created on the fly, and it's very dynamic. Oftentimes, it's organized around a single theme that everyone is there to discuss. And so beyond that theme, people can approach it any way they like, but usually there is some sort of central theme for an open space. Also, open space can be used in large context or small. You can do it for a 3-day conference, or you can do it for an afternoon of meetings. It is used in both of those approaches. Another example of this sort of thing is called the World Cafe. And the World Cafe is sort of similar to open space, but instead of there being one theme, there are multiple ideas that you see the conversation with. And typically a World Cafe is done where it's a multiple table event. So you've got 8 or 10 tables set up, and at each table, you seed that table with a topic that is to be discussed at that table. So this is best if you have a handful of topics that you know you want to focus on or talk about. So you seed each table with those topics, and then people can sit at the table, discuss the topic, and then move from table to table. And typically what they do is they keep a facilitator at each table to help keep sort of a institutional memory of what the conversation is like and keep that conversation going. So World Cafe, again, another open form of facilitation. And then there's something called unconferences, and unconferences are very similar, if not identical. You know, open space could be considered an unconference and is often described that way. But the distinction I'm going to make here is that unconference is not tied to the specific facilitation technique. So it might be open space or it might not. It might be World Cafe or it might not. And there are conferences that tout themselves as unconferences. In fact, my experience has been that open space is actually very rigidly defined. People are quite sensitive about the right way and the wrong way to do open space. Um, and that's not to criticize it, but to say that there's some sensitivity about that. And I think with unconferences, there is less of that sensitivity. It's more of we just want to open things up and let people explore this. Whereas when you look at open space, what I find is that oftentimes people will tell you there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, and you can break it, so to speak, which is very different. Again, your mileage may vary. Whoops. Next up is design-based facilitation. And so this is organizational development. And so this is changing the organization or a product or the way we work together. So the first one here is design thinking, and design thinking is as old as the hills. It's been around since the 50s. It's been adopted and encouraged by folks at the Stanford Design School. It has a process that begins with empathizing, defining, ideation, prototyping, and testing. And it has a wide variety of adherents. In fact, it's been adopted by SAFe 5.0 as one of the tenets or practices within SAFe. Organizational design is an evolution of design thinking. It's really design thinking that's applied to designing organizations. And so take design thinking, apply it to your organization, and this is how we lead change within organizations. Art of hosting was completely new to me, had never heard of this before, but it's an approach that feels very community based. It's about creating these hosted sessions where you host others, they host you, you create these hosting communities. So it's scaling up and down from the personal to the organization. And so this is one that I think probably, at least on my part, bears further investigation because I had never heard of it. Human systems dynamics uses adaptive action labs that focus on complex systems analysis to produce changes. It's characterized by these three questions that I put down there. What, so what, and now what? And it's a group of folks. I know some folks in Oregon who are big into human systems dynamics, and I also understand there are some folks in the Midwest as well. And again, it's not one that I know very well, but I'm very curious about. And then there's Theory U, which is MIT's version of change or facilitating organizational change. And so this is the MIT version of how they would approach, facilitate organization transformation. So that is the design-based facilitation. And then there's an entire category that's rather large called participatory facilitation. And participatory facilitation is basically where everybody gets to play. And it captures the wisdom of the crowd and the spirit of the folks involved. And it has a rich history. It's fairly old. Popular theater goes back a long ways. Popular theater is the idea that we can put on some sort of play which will inspire ordinary people to rise up and take action, also known as the theater of the oppressed. And so this has a rich history behind it that goes all the way back to the French Revolution, of all things. And it is not something I see much today, but I think it's fascinating. Then there's reflection action, and it uses participatory tools in what they describe as a very democratic environment. Again, this is the kind of stuff that is used in community activism. So this is often applied in places where there's poverty issues, or injustice is perceived. So you see it used on Indian reservations to give voice to populations that are oppressed or have no voice, and places like that. So it's used to support literacy, numeracy, language learning. This is applied very, very broadly. And there's something called most significant change. And the most significant change approach um, is really about collecting people's stories. And I think this is something that overlaps with Agile in some very interesting ways. It's not something I had heard of before, but you decide on what stories you're going to collect the stories and decide which ones are most significant, and then share those stories and discuss them with stakeholders and contributors. And this is the kind of thing that I think would be very powerful within some Agile organizations. There's also something called outcome mapping, which again was a surprise to me. And it's a methodology for planning, monitoring, and evaluating development initiatives. So again, I think within our Agile community, certainly within the community that's focused on business agility, outcomes are the language we use to describe results for these groups. And so outcome mapping seems like it would be a natural fit. Again, this one was a complete surprise to me, did not even know it existed, probably worth further investigation. Improvisation's been around for a long time, and I've had some experience with it, enjoy it quite a bit. And so it's really good, I've found, for working with small groups to build cohesiveness in those groups. I will say that it is extremely challenging for some people, including, I'll speak for myself in saying that doing the improv training is very, very rigorous. It takes it, you have to be 110% engaged. I don't think I've ever sweated as much as I have when I've been doing improv exercises. It just, you have to bring your full self to it in a way that is very, very powerful. And I'll confess, I'm not sure it's for everyone, but for those that can do it, it's fantastic. And then there's participatory budgeting. This has been around for a little while. Luke Holman, I know, did participatory budgeting with, I think, the city of San Jose to help them do their budgets. That was the first time I saw it and was very impressed with it. It has been incorporated into SAFe 5.0 as a practice that is used for, or recommended practice for, budgeting for value streams in SAFe. So that shouldn't make it any less than what it is. It's a great practice. So this also is something that I think is we're going to be seeing a lot more of in the Agile community. Next up is therapeutic facilitation. And this is all the stuff that comes from modern therapy methods. It was all mom's fault. These methods originated in family therapy techniques, and one of them is systemic constellations, which you may or may not have seen. Systemic constellations are basically a way of taking small groups and arranging them physically in space and discussing the reasons for why people are positioned the way they are and telling a story, basically. It can be a very powerful technique within small groups. And so I've seen it done by Michael Spade and Lissa Atkins. And I've talked to some other folks who've done it. And like I said, it can work very, very well for working out the dynamics of small groups. Psychodrama. I didn't realize this was actually a method, but it can be used as a method. I thought it was just a bad idea. But as it turns out, psychodrama, or acting out a given issue, can help to surface dysfunctions and problems. And so there's actually a method behind it, which, like I said, was a total shock to me. And then there's clean language. And I'm actually quite fond of clean language. I've used it as part of my discovery work that I do with organizations. And it's a way of questioning and talking with folks that is good for discovering people's personal metaphors and helping to understand their problems in a very, for lack of a better term, clean fashion. Um, there are sort of the three core clean questions. And the idea is to not, what they mean by clean is not imposing your own language, your own metaphors, and your own preconceptions on the conversation, and focusing instead on repeating what the person is talking to you about. So all you're doing really is reflecting exactly what they're saying back at them and searching for the metaphors within that conversation that will bring the most meaning to them. Uh, for example, there was a client that I was working with that was in healthcare, and they were in the Midwest. And as I was interviewing them, they started to talk in terms of process health and how they wanted to have a healthy process for their business. And that turned into a whole set of metaphors around the transformation that were organized around health and expressed in terms of health for the process and for the people in the organization that they had never considered before. So clean language can be really, really cool. It's also really hard to do because I keep imposing my own ideas on everything I see. But if you can get it right, it's awesome. Finally, last up is visual facilitation. And I thought this was relatively new. Basically, it's taking advantage of how our brains work to bring visual modes of expression to help reinforce learning. Graphic facilitation, it turns out, has been around since the 70s. I had no idea. But there is an entire branch of folks who have been studying and using graphic facilitation for quite some time, and using it either in a passive role or in an active role. In a passive role, it's basically used as a note-taking aid to enhance the learning of the person who is doing the note-taking. In the active role, it's used dynamically to assist in communicating what you're trying to share or teach. And so you may have seen Dan Pink's video on Drive, where it has the lovely graphic facilitation to go along with it. It's an amazing video. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. That's a great example of graphic facilitation. I've tried to do it myself. It's very challenging. When it goes well, it's wonderful. And when it goes poorly, it's downright embarrassing.
Has anyone seen Jeff Patton do his graphic facilitation? It's really good. He does a good job.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love Jeff Patton. The guy's absolutely amazing. So I have no doubt that it's really incredible. There are various folks who are pushing ideas along visual facilitation. Sketchnoting is one practice. There's Dan Rome wrote a book called, I think it's The Back of the Napkin, and there are others. And so the idea and popularity of this kind of sketching approach is really gathering some steam more and more these days. There's Vica Blow, which is kind of the German version. So it's an entire facilitation technique associated with graphic facilitation. And so if you haven't checked out Vica Blow, it's worth taking a peek at. Whew, that's a lot of stuff. Like I said, the domain of facilitation was much, much broader than I think I had ever really appreciated. There was, again, the categories that I used here are admittedly arbitrary. They're what I saw and interpreted based on, the stuff that I found. I was tempted to add another line for Agile Facilitation. But I decided that there's no distinction, that Agile crosses all of these domains, and steals liberally from all of them. And so it didn't really make sense to have a category that was just Agile Facilitation. Almost all of the techniques that I've seen we do in the Agile community, whether it's innovation games, NVC, open space, design thinking, it crisscrosses everywhere. And so I think it's hard to make that case. But I'm sure this is going to grow. This was my first attempt at trying to catalog the different methods out there. And again, I was looking for the stuff that was transformative in nature, the kinds of things that really open up conversations in powerful ways. And so you may argue that some of these may or may not do that, but that's what I'm seeking to find here. So I've got upcoming classes. So some of the custom training that I do and SAFE certification is listed here, as well as coaching and consulting. You can find out more at the Thomas Perry LLC website. And I've got a YouTube channel. That's where a recording of this will go, along with my other webinars. So if you're interested in those webinars, please go to the YouTube channel. And I also have a blog where I publish weekly on various and sundry Agile topics. So please feel free to check that out. And that is that for today. Any questions?